for Kimberly Lemley and our team with information systems for all that they do to get us set up for our virtual meetings, particularly while we are under our emergency order and are still experiencing a high transmission of cases due to COVID. I'm doing a brief check and I see Commissioners Burrell, Sheffield, and Richardson. Commissioner Gamble, if you are here with us, just please say so that I know to look for you, particularly when you're speaking. Okay, so right now I have Commissioners Burrell, Sheffield, and Richardson. And going into today's presentations, we have 3 of them before us. The first one is to address findings from the Mobility Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax Referenda that was discussed in our public outreach meetings. That will be followed by a presentation by Community Development to go over the amendments to our county code. And lastly, we will be continuing our presentations for the 23-24 fiscal year of the biennial budget cycle. And we will have juvenile court with us for that presentation. And who do we have from juvenile court today?
Should have a doc. His office is on there. Yeah.
Okay.
He's right here. Commissioner.
Oh, okay, I see.
And Gambrel joined.
Okay, great. So we are now joined by Commissioner Gambrel and Adolphus. It will share with me that you will be presenting for juvenile court. So with that, why don't we go ahead and kick off our first presentation with Drew Ressler of DOT to present findings from our MSPLOS discussions.
Good morning or good afternoon. Can just get a thumbs up that everyone can still hear me. All right, good deal. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present this information. This is a topic that we have been discussing for some time, and excited to share the results of the public outreach. Before I walk through those results, I did want to just set the table a little bit with the opportunity and challenge that we face here. So just looking back, we've got great opportunity. When we look at the general SPLOS that has seen great support here in the county, and the 22 SPLOS that just began collections this month, the foundation of the transportation system has been addressed in terms of infrastructure preservation, taking care of what we have now through resurfacing, bridge replacements, drainage replacements, things that are nuts and bolts of just making sure that what we have currently is able to sustain for the long term. However, what the current SPLOS and our current funding does not allow is to take advantage of both funding opportunities as well as to take care of the future needs of the county. So when we look at the horizon of the CTP, the 30 years there, we see a county that's going from 750,000 to 1 million people. We see growth in jobs and population and housing and employment. All of that will have a direct and acute impact on the transportation system. So that's the challenge ahead of us, and the opportunities are there, and that's what we're here to discuss, not just from a local legislative options, but also in terms of funding coming out of DC. So we saw just recently the passage of the infrastructure bill that will bring a lot of local opportunity to partner with the federal government and the state to deliver larger projects.
Are they trying to make an educational?
Excuse me, can everyone mute themselves, please, except for Drew with DOT? Thank you. Continue.
So there's great opportunity there. The challenge that comes with that opportunity is the local match. Both GDOT and the ATL have mentioned, while there's great opportunities out there, the limiter for a local government's ability to take advantage of that will likely be the local match. So with that foundation, I will walk through this fairly quickly, but will offer certainly throughout. Feel free to interrupt me or at the end to answer any questions or facilitate any conversation from the board. So with that, again, I'll move through these relatively quickly given the large agenda that we have ahead of us. So I will look for a thumbs up that y'all can see my screen.
Yes, sir, we got it.
There we go. So the agenda, we discussed this here. Also, to set the table, I did want to define our acronyms at DOT. We love our acronyms. A few of those are the CTP, which will be considered tonight by the board. That is the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, and what that is an evaluation of the existing conditions of the transportation network, a needs assessment looking at where the growth will be and what strains that puts on the transportation system, and then recommendations coming out of those needs and the existing conditions to address the growth and the demands on the transportation system. The ATL is just established by legislative act in 2018. It's the Atlanta Region Transit Link Authority. That is the authority that looks at regional transit planning in the Atlanta metro area, including Cobb County. The ARTP is a function of the ATL, and that's the regional transit plan that the ATL puts out. The statewide strategic transportation plan is a document in coordination with ARC and the Atlanta Regional Commission and the Georgia Department of Transportation that sets broad statewide policy direction on transportation. IGA is just an intergovernmental agreement, and then mobility SPLOST is a general term that can define two specific items. So with that, I will refresh very briefly the two legislative options that the county has in terms of levying a sales tax for local control. The history on this, so on August 10th, the board approved a task order with Kimley Horn to develop 3 scenarios within each of these different funding options. And you see the information there, and I know we've discussed this in the past. These are the scenarios that were developed in partnership with Kimley Horn through that task order that was approved by the board in August. It was 3 different scenarios for the 170, the 5-year capital program. And you see there just the volume of projects, giving a flavor for how far the dollar stretches, as well as for the transit scenarios, the House Bill 930 option looked at 3 different options, recognizing in transit the 2 levers that we can pull are coverage, how much of the county we can cover, productivity, how highly productive is that service, and then some balance of the 2 in terms of a fixed funding source, and then outreach. So once those scenarios were developed, we went and had town halls in each of the districts. Had good attendance for those, which we were glad to see, given that it was in November. And you see there the advertisements for the survey and the town halls, as well as the webpage and the stakeholder meetings and city and CID meetings that were interlaced with that. So to the results, you will see here intermixed both results from the Mobility SPLOST survey outreach that went in tandem with the town halls, as well as responses from the CTP that asked when similar questions were asked. So I'll define those as we go. But this was from the survey. This particular slide was from the survey in November. You see there when those responses were. We had 629 responses. I will note this survey was not scientifically verified to ensure that we had equal representation or equitable representation, in that it reflected likely voters. We did have a scientific survey through the CTP that also has some results in here, as well as we go through this. You see here coming from the Mobility SPLOST survey in November, the relative priorities that were determined there from ranking 1 all the way through 6, with a focus on active transportation, which we think is a little bit of a function coming from COVID, where folks were spending more time at home and wanting to enjoy the neighborhood in which they lived. If we look at the CTP and some of the more scientifically verified survey results, we see maintained roads being really maintaining the infrastructure that the county has, being where folks would spend most of the plurality of their money. Given $100, where would you spend it? And then right behind that on transit service, which much of the county had thought had been underfunded in the surveys, as well as then active transportation, and then signal timing and innovative technology before you get into new roads and widening roads. This, moving back again, looking at the bottom of the slide, you'll see this is from the November outreach. where should investments be prioritized? And really the big takeaway here is to look at need and distribute the investment throughout the county as much as possible based on that need. So relative to 930 in the transit referendum, of the three scenarios presented, the balance and then the coverage and heavy rail scenarios, which how should the county invest any transit investments? And you see there really a third, 30% each to either none of the above or into a split between the balanced and the productivity and heavy rail scenarios. And then you see there the current usage of transit. And we believe that that's a function of this next slide, which asked what type of transit are you most likely to use? Heavy rail being the most likely. And then moving from there down the train of productivity, other productivity type options. So you see there a lot of responses for high capacity. I believe that represents the split between those two. The desire to have rail for transit, but also the recognition of the costs associated with that. And then based on the information provided, should the county propose a referendum to the voters? Again, we see a split of about a third. We see a third that says yes to both anything that's needed for transportation, a third that have said that there should not be a sales tax, and then another third that is split between a transit focus or a not sure or a transportation focused. And then you see here the results again. This is from the November outreach. How much should be collected, and then through here we see the two ends of the spectrum, either the don't know, not sure, don't support at 38%, or the 1% for the 170, and then the second pie chart there on the right is removing those don't supports of anyone that would be supportive of a 170. How much should be collected? And we see there a majority of the 1%. Here asking the same questions relative to a transit expansion referendum. We see again that 41% in the don't know, not sure, don't support, 35% in the full penny. And then again, when we pull out for the don't support, we see a larger percentage that recognize the cost of transit being very high and the commitment needing to be there to be able to maintain it in the long term. And so the recognition that will take the full 1%. And then again, relative to the 930, for how long should it be collected? And we see here the plurality in the 30 years, and then certainly when we remove for the don't supports, we see that that increase to plurality of 44%, recommending the full 30 years, the maximum allowed by law. Notice the change in the graphic at the bottom. So this is from a scientifically verified survey that came out of the CTP. This was more in the summer of 2021. And you'll see here for the 170, the transportation option, 47% in the yes, 37% in the no, and then the remainder in the middle. Similar question for the transit referendum. We see a larger percent in the yes, slightly of 48%, and then still the 15% in the unsure. I would categorize them as it depends on the specifics. And then you'll see here a summary there where we see the ends of each end of the spectrum represented of those that are supportive of the full maximum allowed by law and those that are in the don'ts. We also asked some demographic questions that you'll see here, as well as where folks are. This does skew towards East Cobb, just in terms of representation from the November survey. Again, going back to the scientific survey for the CTP, that was more scientifically valid. This also does represent, you'll see less density of participation on the western edges of the county, both in the north and the south. Some of that is due to density, and some is due to participation. You'll see here the current employment status, as well as how folks would describe themselves. And then finally, voter statistics. So in blue is the survey participation, and then in green is the likely voters, and we got this information from elections. Also compared the survey and the likely voters in terms of race, and so you'll see the results there. So I know I went through that very quickly, but did as part of the presentations in the town halls back in November, we did commit to presenting this information back out in January. So like I said, I know I went through that very quickly, but glad to answer any questions or provide any additional information if I have left anything off.
Thank you, Drew, for your presentation. I will defer to commissioners to see if they have any questions or comments before I make any.
I have one, Madam Chair. This is Commissioner Sheffield regarding the scientific survey. So for the most recent survey with the 629 respondents, Drew, you mentioned that either the majority or all of them were from East Cobb. I'm not sure what the breakdown is there. But for the scientific survey, would you happen to have a breakdown based on district?
We did, and I'd be glad to share that out after this meeting. So it was there were about 2,000 respondents from memory, 2,000 to 2,400 respondents. So roughly 600 in each of the districts from the scientific survey. And then what it did to make sure that it was scientifically valid is it then any area, whether it's geographically or demographically, that was underrepresented, it plussed up the weight of those responses it got to equalize it with the population.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'd be glad to share that out again.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Drew. And I appreciate you explaining that methodology of how the responses were weighted. I think that's important because of the areas that have active use of transportation had to be plussed up, then there still could be a spreading of opinion that may not be reflective of that entire area. So it has its pros and its cons for doing that versus ensuring that there is contact with persons equitably across all the districts. Interesting. Commissioner Richardson, I saw your camera go on. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'll ask a question. Thank you. Drew, thanks for your presentation. Just wondering, were there any key takeaways that you think we should really be aware of as a board from doing this study?
So I think the takeaways are probably more pronounced in the scientific survey, but the one thing that I did keep coming back to, both in the scientific survey as well as in the survey here from November, is that 15 to 20% of the unsure, or I would classify them again as the it depends group, of making sure that whatever is put before the voters is very responsive to that group, and is something that does excite that group to come out and support whatever it's put.
Interesting.
Okay.
Commissioners, I'm sorry, go ahead. Commissioner Richardson?
No other questions from them.
Thank you. Commissioners Burrow or Gambrill, do you have any comments or questions?
I'm good.
Thank you, Commissioner Burrow. Commissioner Gambrill?
So Drew, if it's about, essentially what vote or which way we go depends on how many people are reached, which way are you thinking that the board needs to go?
So I'll leave that.
1:70 or 9:30?
So I will leave that to the board as a policy matter. You're glad to provide any supporting information, but really look to the board on what the priority of the board is to on infrastructure transportation investments.
Okay, but I guess from the data you have collected and using the data, what is the data suggesting the temperament of the voters would be for us to put forward?
I'll say as we look through this presentation, and glad to share this out, when we look at the responses for both the transit and the transportation, the responses are fairly similar in terms of generally close to 50% that are generally supportive of the idea of investing in either, with then generally a 30 to 35% that are do not want to see an increase in sales tax, with again the margin there of the it depends. The results are very similar between those two.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Burrow.
Going back to Commissioner Sheffield's question about the scientific study, I would like to see those results as well.
We'll be glad to share that out again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Yeah, if I can jump in. So I know that we had our town halls regarding the transportation plan, but in looking at the numbers, both in the scientific and unscientific studies, those numbers are very, very low considering the population of Cobb. And I'm just concerned, even with the scientific is just less than 2,500 people for a county that's like 750 plus thousand strong. So what have been some of our outreach efforts in addition to our town halls and our online surveys?
So I'll speak very specifically to the scientific survey. So we mined all of the various listservs and contact information that the county had through various billings and different contacts, whether it be through parks or water that we had, and did a large outreach in terms of trying to get participation. I will say I am not a subject matter expert on scientific surveys and what is a statistically valid sample size, but I will say that those that we did have on the team that was their technical expertise, we're very confident in the scientific survey and it being statistically valid. Certainly in a community of 800,000, 2,400 doesn't sound like a lot, but when compared to other similar, whether it be polls or surveys that are done statewide, nationally, or even locally, that level of participation was deemed significant enough or broad enough from both geographically and demographically to be able to make some solid findings from that data.
Okay, thanks, Drew.
Yes, are there any other questions or comments? Drew, again, I want to thank you for your presentation and just for the amount of time that you put into going out and meeting with the public and sharing with them the different options that are before us. We've been on this path for multiple years now in preparing not only for our CTP, but also for our referendum in November. And this board has continued those efforts and coming on board last year with hopes to be able to provide some very clear direction to DOT with where we would like to see things go for November. And so it's interesting to get the results back, which I think still puts the ball squarely back in the court of the commissioners. And I appreciate your response to Commissioner Gamble that this is still a BOC policy decision. And just even seeing the outcome of the surveys, it just makes it very clear that we need to make that decision. and we need to make that decision fairly soon. As was discussed, I believe, in our meeting yesterday, that we will need to put forward a list of projects for consideration for the Atlanta Regional Transportation Plan. And those projects will be pulled from our CTP. And so as that moves forward, we need to be very clear on where we see our board going in November, just due to the timeline that's before us. I can share with you, and I'll be very clear in sharing that I believe that not only this board, but the county should seize this moment to finally make serious and robust investment in transit that we have had opportunity to do for decades through the initiation of MARTA, and which we have contemplated up until this very moment without ever making serious investment in this arena. I know even in the contemplation of our 2022 SPLOST program, there were not any transit items put in there because it was presumed that we would put those in whatever referendum that we put forward this year, as there was a leaning that we would make the decision to see this move forward for the county this year. In moving transportation forward for this year, we've been giving two options of 170 and 930. And through all the discussions that I've had with commissioners and with our mayors initially, there was concern that putting both of these measures on the ballot would cause some confusion for voters. And if we did it to the max, it was certainly, or to the max expenditure allowed, which is 1 cent per program, that it could deter some voters by putting our sales tax to 8 cents. So last year, in discussions about midway through the year with commissioners, there was general desire to lean towards 930. And that was echoed in my conversations with mayors at that time, simply to reduce the confusion and also to ensure that we were not duplicating our efforts as we just proposed transportation-oriented projects in the 2022 SPLOST. We would be coming back essentially 2 years after that and putting forward projects that could have been put on that list. I strongly support us going down that path of focusing on 930 for November. We have, again, opportunity to do what this county has not done and seize the moment where not only do we have commissioners supportive of putting a transit referendum on the ballot, but we have a very friendly presidential administration, which has led in investing in our nation's infrastructure, which means that we can pull down an unprecedented amount of dollars towards transit should Cobb County take advantage of this moment. Cobb County taking advantage of this moment also reflects the moment that's here in our state. We have some significant elections that are occurring where people will be out at the polls. So this is not like other SPLOST, for instance, our education SPLOST during an off-presidential election year, where you don't know what that turnout's going to be. It's highly likely that we will have a strong turnout among residents to vote on this measure, which helps to ensure that that what is decided is more reflective of the general population versus it being held in a different year. I think we take advantage of this moment to probably have one of the lowest sales taxes rates in the metro region and have robust investment in transit. I can't perceive any other area in the metro Atlanta region that has a 7-cent sales tax with a penny investment in transit. So we can lead in that respect. If we do this, our only main competitor for transit dollars in the state would be the system of MARTA. And so for us to be, another player in that arena just again helps us to be competitive. 930 helps us to be more competitive than 170 because with the commitment of investment of dollars to the tune of what we could collect makes us a more viable contender than if we were to just pull down funds from 170. I think if we go towards 930, there's no telling what some of the other challenges may be. We know we're in a pandemic. We know that inflation is high, but I tell you, commissioners, if we don't do it now, when do we do it? I have never seen a board more willing to do this than any board that I've served with over the past 9 years. And I would say that the transportation community looks at this board as being the most ripe for supporting something like this than any other board that has served in Cobb County. So if you do not help to move this forward, who will do it besides you? I had that same conversation with our transit advisory board last night, and they sent us some comments with respect to us moving forward and looking at how we can augment our CTP to be more flexible and reflective of the public. So again, the ball is in our court. I think momentum is in our court. And I hope that we take advantage of this moment and the very unique opportunity that we have to finally bring some transformation to Cobb County. And I'm putting my eggs in that basket that we at least try in November. If we try and fail, you always could get another bite at the apple. But if we do not try, we will have missed the exigence of this moment. Those are my comments, Drew.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that wraps up all the comments and questions of commissioners, and we will segue to our next presentation, which will be with community development to provide amendments that have been recommended for our county code.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. This is our annual update to the county code, and we have a number of amendments this year. You all should have received the code amendment package for the year. Of course, this is a little different format from our typical presentation, so I just hope that you'll all bear with us. This afternoon, we'll have the subject matter expert from each department, the one who prepared the draft amendments, to present the amendments to you. We'll go chapter by chapter. We'll have a number of our staff who will be presenting those amendments. And my recommendation, if it's agreeable to you, Madam Chair, and to the board, would be that as we complete each chapter, that we pause for a moment to take any questions that the board may have on that specific chapter while we still have the subject matter expert up. This is the first public hearing that we'll have this evening. We will have the first public hearing tonight. The second public hearing will be scheduled on February 8th, and that'll be your first chance to vote to take action on the code amendment package this year. So with all that being said, we just thank you for your time to hear this presentation this afternoon, and I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Kevin Ashbaugh with the Police Department to talk about the amendments to Chapter 6, the Alcohol Ordinance.
Thank you. Give me just a moment to get everything pulled up. All right, can you see my presentation?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. So first we have Chapter 6, alcoholic beverages. And mostly these updates are to add definitions or clarify some of the existing code. Some of it will bring county code more in line with state law changes, particularly with regard to the to-go sales of alcoholic beverages. And we'll go to do that. A lot of this comes from questions we receive from our alcohol licensees in the county throughout the year.
Excuse me, Kevin,
Yes.
Before you started, do you want us to wait after you go through this to take questions, or do you prefer questions along the way?
Questions along the way are fine.
Okay.
But first, we have in 6-1 definitions, like I said, we've added some terminology used in the alcohol industry. we're receiving questions throughout the year related to the sale of things like flights or to growlers, things that were not outlined in the code, some of which were actually contravened by the code. So we've changed some of them, like a approved container was not defined in regards to to-go sales in county ordinance. Mixed drink and package were not defined either, although they were used in the existing code. Are there any questions on the definitions?
No, just a comment that I learned more about the names of these packages than I ever thought I could and would.
You and me both. When I got a phone call asking about if flights, the service of flights were legal in Cobb County, I was like, what is a flight? And I had to start looking these things up. We get some interesting questions.
I did have some questions,
yes.
and I know I had a long conversation with staff a couple weeks ago on this. There's some inconsistency with the definitions. For example, the crowler, it says means a sealed aluminum can containing 32 ounces. And then the words of craft or draft beer filled from a tap and sealed at a licensed brewery. That is not carried through all the other definitions of containers. So I didn't know why that wasn't carried through on the other containers. And then also with being so specific as to these names, how are you going to address if somebody all of a sudden comes up with a new name to refer to a container?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you want to answer or you want me to shoot the rest of them at you?
Oh, let me grab this one first. So this was the culmination of some industry questions we were getting. So we did research, and it's mainly with licensed breweries that were just not addressed. It's become a real popular thing. So we went and found every term that we could find that might pertain to that industry, how they sell these drinks. And again, this was a learning thing for us. I'd never heard these terms till they started calling, asking if they could sell them. So we tried to make it as broad as we could, mainly to let the industry understand what is or isn't legal in Cobb County, especially with regards to pouring licenses, selling drinks to go in some form or fashion.
Okay, so then
answer some of it.
Sure. So again, going back to the crowler, do we need to make sure that the of craft or draft beer filled from a tap and sealed at a licensed brewery is carried into those other definitions?
And which other definitions?
So like growler.
Okay.
That's not there. Howler, that's not there. And again, if the crowler, growler, and howler can all be filled at the brewery, then shouldn't that language be included in all of them?
That might be a good idea to add that to all of them for consistency. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then I guess this is in state law, but where it says curbside pickup, it says within a paved parking area adjacent to the licensed premises. So we know in zoning, adjacent means the property next door. I don't think that's the intent here. It means the parking lot adjacent, but adjacent in zoning means the next property. So my question was, would this allow delivery essentially off-site if it was the property adjacent to this location?
I don't believe I actually wrote that one, but I think you are correct. If adjacent is used in zoning for a different meaning, then maybe that language might need to be changed to on the licensed premises or something to that effect.
Okay. And again, I know part of this language was taken from the state law, but again, I think this is something that needs to be addressed.
Commissioner Gamble, can you clarify what code section that is?
Chair, we're still in section 6.1, the definitions.
Okay, can you provide which subsection or which definition you're referring to that has the term adjacent in it?
As I said before, curbside pickup.
Okay, thank you.
So my next one is the definition for flight. In other sections of the code, it's referred to as flight tasting, not flight. So do we want to make sure that the definition is defined as we use it throughout the rest of the code?
Let me take a look. What other section does it refer to flight tastings?
Okay, I'll have to. So, you're gonna have to. I'll have to look through all that. So we can get together offline. But again,
Okay, yes, ma'am.
it's just one of those things where if we're going to refer to it as flight tasting, I'd like to see it defined as flight tasting, because then on page 13. So now for the rest of the board, we're jumping sections. We then go to talking about ounces. And it just says a flight.
Commissioner, again, we can better follow you if you give us the subsection letter. On page 13, there's letter B through G. Please let us know which subsection.
It starts with A, B, C. Again, flight is mentioned multiple times throughout this entire document.
Okay.
So that's why I'm stating this as a, kind of a general question. And if it's something that we can, again, continue the conversation, because
we just want to follow you. And commissioners, there's 2 page numbers on the page. There's the page number that corresponds to the agenda book. And then there's the page number that refers to the entire code page. And the page number 13 Commissioner Gamble is referring to is the page that is not the agenda book page. It is the page of the code section packet. So that would be actually page 22 of 379 in the agenda book.
And all my comments will be made from the code packet that we received.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So then on page 13, where it defines what the ounces would be, if you go now back to section 6.1 under definitions, where it says sample, a sample just says a small amount.
Correct. We are differentiating between samples and flights.
But on page 13, it says flight. It does. So to me, your flight shall not exceed 5 fluid ounces, but then you're saying a sample is served as a single serving. But if you then go to a flight, it says service of several small samples. So again, is that wiggle room in there? And can we possibly clean it up a little bit?
We can certainly take a look at that. Mainly what we were trying to differentiate between, like, a sample is usually a single drink, whereas a flight is usually 5 to 6 individual samples. And since sample does not define a limit on how much can be in a sample, this is to control the over service issue, where if they're selling you 5 or 6 individual drinks in a flight, those samples can only be a certain size. Whereas if it's a free sample, or you're just paying for a sample, a single drink, it's not limited to what size it can be. This is mainly to help with the code section, another code section that previously read that you could not be served more than 2 drinks, one person at one time. So to allow for flights to be served, we had to make this change to allow more than those 2 drinks to be served. And that way we limit the quantity of alcohol in each of those 5 or 6 servings.
Okay. But again, and this is just words matter, going back to page 13, and then it'd be 2A, B, and C. It says individual servings of beer and malt beverages in a flight shall not exceed 5 ounces. So are you saying that each sample that can be served can be 5 ounces each, multiple
Yes.
times?
Yes.
Okay. But then I guess it still conflicts served as a single serving. So, okay. Those were all the questions I had for definitions.
Commissioner Gambrell?
Yes.
Hey, this is Jessica. Back to your question about the curbside pickup, just for clarification there. I'm looking at the definition and I see it says a paved parking area adjacent to the licensed premises. I think the solution here is to make it clear that it needs to be a paved parking location on the property of the licensed premises. So we can clarify that language.
Thank you.
Great.
I do have a question regarding definition, and thank you, Commissioner Gambrell, because you had taken several off my list I can just check off, so thank you. But going back to page 2, section 61C, it has an affixed label or marking that identifies the licensee that prepared and sold the mixed drink. My question is, does an affixed label only apply to mixed drinks? Now, while I understand that bottled beer or canned beer is already sealed, but for those beverages that will be poured from a draft, those don't come sealed from the manufacturer. So again, my question is whether or not the affixed label only applied to mixed drinks.
Okay, and which definition is that in, ma'am?
Again, that's 6.1C.
Approved container.
It's part of the definitions of mixed drink.
Yes.
Yep.
I see it. And I believe this came from state law. Jessica, you might be able to chime in on that.
Yes, I can speak to that a bit. Commissioner, even when it's not a mixed drink, for instance, if you go to a store that sells growlers or howlers, sells craft beer, and that mechanism of, for instance, the Whole Foods out on Cobb Parkway does too. Whenever you purchase that at the location, they do seal it. So although it comes out of a draft, they seal it at the location after they fill it. So yes, any beverage served that way would be sealed.
But my question is that defined as a mixed drink? So when I see the word mixed drink, there's a mixture of perhaps alcohol, some sort of, I don't know, cocktail chaser or whatever, but I just want to make clear if mixed drinks mean any drinks, or is it like a cocktail mixed drink?
So there's also a definition in here of mixed drink in this particular, and this may be from state law. I agree with Sergeant Ashball here. We can confirm that, but there's a definition also included in the package here for mixed drink that specifies that it's a combination of distilled spirits and also non-alcoholic liquid or liquids.
And what page, where are you finding that?
That's on the page 3 up at the top of the page, on page 3 of the Code Amendment package.
Okay.
Still in section 6.1, the definition of mixed drink.
Okay. Beverage repair.
Might it be better if we changed that terminology from mixed drink to alcoholic beverage?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's where you're going with that.
Yeah.
And this is where I need help in understanding, Jessica and Sergeant Ashball, is if you can help us understand what is being lifted from industry practice, from other municipalities and state code. We certainly have a lot of questions, and it's hard to, it's hard to follow. For one, this is a very nuanced subject matter that we're all learning about, but it's hard to understand when I'm listening to the questions, and even with my own questions, is this material, again, is this typical of what is seen across jurisdictions here in Georgia? Is this coming from state code? Is this industry driven? Because we can make changes here, but the business owner who's in the industry might be used to a certain code in their practice here in the state or with municipalities. And so it's just some general mindfulness I have of what their knowledge is of this. And then also, are we going to have gaps where persons are looking at the state code, looking at our code, and it's just not very clear. So as we're asking questions, I just would like you to give me some context as to where these particular changes are coming from.
Okay.
Chair, I appreciate
Yes.
that. So the changes in the alcohol code, some of them are amendments that were put forth by a police department. Some of them were put forth by our business license division. So I'm going back and looking at this. As you'll recall, as the board will recall, during the initial days of the pandemic, whenever restaurants were doing a lot of carry out at the time, they were also bottling up their margaritas, serving it, packaging it in a form that is sealed to sell as a to-go item. So this codifies that. Whenever you look at the approved container and then you go into the mixed drink section, that essentially will make that something that could continue, provided that the mixed drink, whether it's margaritas or what have you, were to be sold as a to-go item from a licensed establishment. I think that a lot of this, this isn't something that's new in state law. This is something that, well, I'll confirm that with Alicia, but so that's ultimately what's being achieved here.
Okay, because from listening to the number of questions that we have, again, with the nuance of this and how this is being driven by that being allowed during the pandemic, I'll just be very frank. If we get this detailed with just this particular subsection, and I know just looking at my questions regarding this, we will be here for a substantial amount of time. And I'm wondering if it's worth it, ensuring that staff is sitting down with each commissioner regarding this. And as we ask questions, just helping us understand again, if we're being consistent with state law and practice, so that, again, we have a relevant code, but that each commissioner's questions are being answered, because there are a lot of questions that are flowing from this particular section of code. And I see Commissioner Richardson's hands up.
Thanks.
Jessica, that staff and you and Kevin can you sit down with staff? And I see Debbie Blair. I don't know if Debbie was involved in the drafting of this particular code change, but is this something that can be done between
Yes,
now
absolutely.
and? Okay.
Yes, we can get with our business license division manager along with Kevin, and we'll be happy to come to you all, to come to the board and walk through any questions that you have on these changes to the alcohol ordinance prior to the 8th.
Okay, and I know Commissioner Gambrill had an additional question. Commissioner Sheffield, you may have wanted to say more. I see Burl and Richardson, so I will go to each commissioner, and then it's going to be it'll be my request after this next round of questions that we let the presenter finish the presentation, or else we'll never get through if we ask before we even get past their initial slide. If that's okay, commissioners. All right.
I mean,
so
it's okay. I think that was his request to take it after each, but I'm okay.
Yes, I agree. Yes, he did open himself up to this, so he's getting that. But I'm just concerned about us getting through this.
No, I understand. No, I'm
Yes.
fine with waiting. Yeah.
My comment was going to be, I would appreciate just the one-on-one follow-up, because there is a long list of questions. There's a long list of questions.
Okay.
Commissioner Richardson, Commissioner Burl, and then Gambrill, I know your camera went off, but I'll come back to you after Burl. Go ahead, Commissioner Burl.
Yeah, I would actually like one-on-one, as I imagine the other commissioners do as well, for all the code amendments. Once we have this presentation and hear from the public after the first public hearing tonight, I think we'll have a lot of suggestions and revisions and clarification. So I'd like to have that, before the February 8th meeting, but after we hear from the public tonight too.
Thank Thank you, Commissioner Burrow. Yes, I would suggest even as soon or no later than next week, early next week, so that if there are any changes made, there's time for everybody to consider those changes. Commissioner Gambrill.
So I proposed all my questions from the whole code amendment package to the appropriate staff about 3 weeks ago. And
Okay.
I did have communication with Drew on the DOT. There was an oversight there, so a few of my questions have been answered, but otherwise, I have not gotten answers to the questions that I posed. So I know I came into this meeting kind of going, okay, maybe they changed it and just didn't communicate it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how we're doing it this year. But I did communicate my concerns, like I said, about 3 weeks ago. And they
Thank
have
you.
not been addressed.
Okay. So I think there's opportunity here for us to all have a one-on-one with staff for each of the code amendments. And just for this meeting, my ask to commissioners would be to let the presenters present the material. And then let's take advantage of the opportunity that we'll have after hearing from the public tonight to speak with staff individually so we can ensure everyone's questions are heard. Commissioner Richardson, yes, ma'am.
I just want to say I can hold all of my questions. I just request that, and I think they've already started in doing each of the presentations, but for each code amendment, just to highlight what the problem was that we were trying to solve, and that will help guide how the following process.
Very good. And so I don't want to keep us from asking any questions, certainly, but just be mindful that it's been recognized that there needs to be one-on-ones with commissioners. So particularly if we're asking detailed questions where, there's not a ready response or it looks like there may need to be an extensive discourse. I would just ask again that we have that outside of this meeting, but by all means, I don't want to quell any questions from this. I just really want to be mindful of us being able to get through this presentation. So this can not only be presented to us, but also the public.
So what I would suggest, Chairwoman, too, is for staff to reach out to each of the commissioners' assistants to try to get on their calendar, but also ask each of the commissioners per section, if you have any specific questions or clarification, would you put them in writing to us? And then that way we can take that same correspondence and go beneath your question and answer your question beneath the question that you've submitted. And Commissioner Burrow, I understand what you're saying is that it will continue to evolve as you all hear from others through public comment or public hearings, so we can always address those as well.
Yes, Commissioner Richardson, did you have another question?
No, I just lowered my hand.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yes, and I appreciate that suggestion. That's from our county manager, Dr. McMorris. That would help us also know what each other's questions are, so staff can share that via email among us. So yes, that would be the request, to have those in writing. And if we can do our best to try to have those in writing, let's say by the end of this week, that gives us a fighting chance for everybody to have opportunity to consider them. Okay. With that, Sergeant Ashball.
Yes, ma'am.
Hold on, Dr. McMorris has one more thing.
To speed this up, and I apologize for interrupting, but I know some other departments are responsible for some of the code changes and edits, just like the sergeant was talking about. Copy that director if you don't mind. So if it's something in DOT or if it's just Jessica's area, CompDev, I'm certain she will get it to them. But if it's outside of community development, include that other director, because in fairness to Jessica, sometimes she's just coordinating and codifying some of the questions you all may have, but she may not be familiar with why this change is being proffered or what it actually means. So copy that director as well, and or me, and I'll make sure that we get it to the right staff member to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McMorris.
And just one more final thing, I promise this is really it, Madam Chair. But as we continue through the rest of this particular presentation, if you are aware that it's a state law that we're attempting to be in alignment with, if you can just say alignment with state law, so I can just write a note to know that this is state versus the county weighing in.
We can do that, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And sometimes they're just general industry standards that departments update code to match to. So I would just ask that you add that to that as well.
Right. Just to your point that, if you're reading this, it's not, you're reading two different things from the state versus local. So we want to keep consistency whenever we can, but I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, Sergeant Ashbaum, turning things back over to you.
Okay. Okay. And just kind of a short answer to the state law versus industry. The state law changes are primarily related to that state law change regarding to-go sales, which just wasn't reflected in the ordinance. The rest of this is primarily going to be more either industry-oriented or problems we're facing here in the unit. So Article 3, licenses. So these are mainly updated to help us with unlicensed businesses. The previous ordinance actually applied a lot of things only to businesses with an alcohol license. So that has been stricken out. You'll see, sorry. Rolled the wrong one. All right. So previously 6-87, keeping or storing alcoholic beverages, only applied to a business with that alcohol license. So if we caught another business that was unlicensed selling, we couldn't actually charge them under that code section. So we've removed that limitation. 6-104, we're repealing the kind of antiquated ordinance requirement to put their license information actually on the front glass of the business. So that's just kind of bringing it a little more current, so they're not having to change window stickers or decals and things like that. And I believe on your packet, it shows the entire code section 6-104 stricken out. And Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that last sentence was supposed to remain in there. The license itself shall be prominently displayed so as to be visible to the public inside the premises.
I'm sorry,
Jessica,
what page are we on? What page are we on?
Page three of the packet, the actual code amendments, section 6-104.
Right.
I believe the last sentence was supposed to remain in 104 there. The license itself shall be prominently displayed.
I'll confirm that with Alicia.
Thank you. All right. Moving forward to 6-147, I believe is the next thing. Hang on. Yes, 6-147 will be our next change, and it will be under subsection G2. And we have added to the due cause for denial, suspension, or revocation. We've added if they use a person for the license who is basically using a guise or a dummy, which is where someone who is not qualified under this ordinance to possess or to obtain an alcohol privilege license, using someone else like a spouse to obtain the license, even though the person actually running the business is ineligible. Previously, once it was a cause for denial, but not for suspension or revocation. So once the license was issued, if we found out that they had used someone as a guise or dummy, then it was not a due cause for revoking or suspending that license. Are there any questions to that particular part? I know it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, it's our general consensus that we'll wait, but if commissioners have any burning questions, certainly they can feel free to ask.
Okay. Moving to Article 4, operating regulations for licensed establishments. And I'll specify if anything state law related. Most of this is going to be just related to either issues we're having or industry input. So 6-176, get down to that. This is updated with state law. It was amended. State law was amended in 2020 to allow those to-go sales of alcoholic beverages, and so we're just adding to the county ordinance and changing so that it's now lawful in Cobb County and not a violation of our ordinance. Subsection B previously made it illegal under county ordinance to allow the sale or delivery by the drink to any area other than the premises covered by the license. This has to go also with the state law allowing actual to-go deliveries where they're taking food and beverages to people's homes, which again was related to that COVID state law change. And this just specifies what the requirements are and all that under ordinance. Section 6-179, this pertains to amusement parks. It primarily clears up the language as far as where they can sell them within the park. I think Six Flags is our only park that is affected by this. And previously, areas were supposed to be designated as adult concession areas and so forth. And now this change allows sales at basically food or beverage locations within the park and stipulates where they can then take the drinks and so forth. They can't leave with them. And it also specifies that they have to have methods of ensuring that those being served and possessing alcohol in the park are 21 or older. All right, under Division 3, employees, some of this was just changed to clarify stuff that was confusing our citizens coming in to get work permits, particularly with regards to citizenship requirements. The way it was previously written was often interpreted to mean that if you were not a United States citizen, you could not get a work permit, but it was really just a or situation. Either you are a United States citizen or you're an alien resident, admitted for permanent residence, or otherwise possess employment authorization from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So we cleared that language up a little bit for those folks. And then further down at the bottom of A, you'll see any person on parole, probation, or convicted and released from incarceration. This was a major confusion for our customers because it previously read for any crimes and then had a list. So they were checking yes, which would make them ineligible for a license, when in reality, this part only applied to sexual related offenses. So we added that language in there for any sexual related crimes to clarify that for them. All right, and 6-207 just aligns with our department practice. It came to my attention this year that the requirement for work permits for those working at alcohol establishments included anyone working security at the establishment. Since the stadium opened, Cobb County police officers have been allowed to work part-times at businesses with an alcohol license. Under the existing code section, they were technically supposed to be getting work permits through this office, but that doesn't really make sense if we're employing them full-time as police officers and they're only working security. They're off-duty as a part-time job. So we've added an exemption for that for any police officer who is currently post-certified and possesses arrest powers and is actively employed by a public law enforcement agency. All right. Continuing, let's see. The existing code section 6-207, it required that licensees provide information to employees, but there was no specification exactly what that meant, and there was no time limit. So we have changed that now from that they must provide information to that they must provide training to their employees, and we've put a 10-day cap on that. They have to provide that training within 10 days of employment, just kind of hold them to a standard. And then we've changed it from providing regular information to providing annual training thereafter. We've added language as well to add a requirement for the licensee to make their training records available to the police department. It didn't previously specify that. It was the business license division. But since we're the ones that actually do these inspections, we've added us to that list of who they have to provide it to. And then also there was never yes, ma'am. I hear a question? Okay.
Questions, sir?
So as far as the permits we issue, they were never described or anything in ordinance. So we've added some minimum information requirements and physical characteristics as far as like security measures to make sure they're not easily forged or duplicated. And also some language to allow my office to issue temporary permits. What we've been encountering with the stadium, especially this last year, they haven't been able to get enough employees, so they're bringing busloads in from out of state, which provides us two problems. One, they sometimes don't get here in time to get a picture. And also, when we run a background check on people for a work permit, we can only see Georgia criminal history. So if they're coming from out of state, we're not going to see that criminal history, and we may be giving permits to people who are otherwise ineligible. And once that permit's issued, by ordinance, it's valid for 12 months. So by allowing us to issue temporary work permits for 30 days, that gives us more time to get that person in for a picture or to obtain their out-of-state criminal history from them before we give them a full 12-month permit.
Sounds.
Section 6-209, this is an addition. It's similar to the health spa ordinance, which would require licensees to submit list or new employee information to us within 72 hours of their employment. This would help us with keeping in check businesses that are employing unlicensed personnel. Also, it assists us when we go to do inspections, that if we do come across someone who's saying they don't have their permit or with them or something like that, we would then have something to check that against, which would just help us with enforcement and regulation of that. And then lastly, in section 6-236, pricing of alcoholic drinks, this pertains to flights. And again, it makes an exception to that 2 drink per person at one time limit for flights specifically, and then limits that maximum number of drinks and serving sizes when they're sold as a flight. So they can't sell them 5 or 6 12-ounce beers as to sample, if we will, and end up getting them intoxicated. Flights are frequently sold, and this is an industry thing. Flights are frequently sold, and we have learned that it's being done in Cobb County, but was technically a violation of the ordinance. But this is just kind of contemporary industry practice. And especially with the breweries and distilleries that we're getting down at, say, the Battery or other areas of the county, it's becoming just a very popular thing. And then lastly, section 6-236C10, we've added state law OCGA 3-3-11 to the exceptions allowing for the removal of alcoholic beverages from a licensed premises. And then we're talking about pouring licenses here. And again, when sold as a sealed to-go drink, this is to align ordinance with state law again. And that's all of the changes for chapter 6.
Thank you. Appreciate your presentation. Commissioner Burrell, do you have a question? Okay, no questions.
And I'll make myself available anytime that you need.
Thank you. With that, Jessica, I'll turn things back over to you.
Okay, I'm pull up my screen real quick.
Okay.
So the next amendment that we have is one pretty quick amendment to Chapter 18. This is building regulations. Currently, Chapter 1827 requires that for any building permit that's issued for a residential structure, a single-family home, where it's being torn down and rebuilt, and this code was put in place years ago as there were a lot of homes being torn down and rebuilt in Indian Hills and also in the Atlanta Country Club. And so basically what it says is that if you're doing a tear down rebuild and you're proposing to increase the elevation, the topographic elevation of the property, it would require demolition permits. It would have to be reviewed and approved and also be subject to district commissioner approval. And the intent there was to really limit the effect that it would have on adjacent properties, specifically looking at things like building height and also stormwater runoff and those sorts of things. At the time that that was done, this was not reviewed by stormwater, but now then that review is in the stormwater management group. The language that's currently in the code only requires documentation of the first floor elevation, but it doesn't really restrict the floor elevation. So there's not a standard to hold it to. So given that this is already happening in the stormwater management group with review to reviewing for stormwater runoff and the effects of the topographic alteration there, we're proposing to remove this language now because it is redundant, and that'll help streamline the process a little bit for permitting.
Okay,
And that's it for that one, if there are no questions.
all right. Any questions?
I mean, I do have a question, but I was going to wait until our one-on-one. But it's certainly related to the stormwater issue and how elevations have played a role in kind of the after a subdivision has been laid and the decisions that someone makes once they've been living in a house for a while. And some of those changes have contributed to some issues and no permits were required. So I may need some clarity on what, I get streamlining, but what we're solving.
Thank you.
And next will be Drew.
Oh, no, actually, Jessica, I had one more. I was wanting to make sure Commissioner Richardson was in. I do have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have a definition for what residential remodeling is?
I don't believe we have an official definition for that. I'll have to go back and check in Chapter 18 at the beginning and see, but I can confirm that.
Okay,
Or
thank you.
make sure that we're clear on exactly what constitutes residential remodeling.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, Drew, go ahead.
Of course. So just one quick slide here, and then you'll hear from me here in a little bit. But the revision to Chapter 50, currently there is no requirement when a development is coming in for a land disturbance permit on a by right property, so that the use is not changing. It's not going through zoning for a traffic study. That will typically be requested if it is a larger development, but this codifies that practice to make it required at a fairly high threshold, so 3,000 vehicle trip-ins or more than 250 in a single hour. So just for reference, one single-family residential home is typically about 10 trips. So this would be equivalent to a subdivision of 300 homes is the threshold at which then a traffic study is required. Again, that higher threshold is just a function of this is a by right development, so the adjacent roads should have the capacity to handle whatever it's currently zoned at. The other item that is not included in this language, but given the response that we had, the goal of the term trip-in was to clarify that it is not a through trip where someone comes in and makes a stop at, say, a gas station and then continues on. But rather the trip end is truly that is two separate and distinct trips. That given the public response that we did have from this language, that clearly did not come through as intended. And so our recommendation to that, again, it's not in here, but one of the things that we'd like to revise is a definition of that. And to call that as trips, and then we have a definition that references the typical methodology for determining what a trip is to clarify that further, so that there is no confusion.
Are there any questions?
That's all for DOT for this.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Drew.
Drew, I do have a question. Again, it's page 18, which is N that we were just discussing, where it says trip ends. But if you go then to section 134, let me find the exact page.
Where it talks about the zoning
Yes, essentially the trip ends are different than it is in that section. And so it's on page 51,
That's
which is section 134, 121, 8.
Yes.
The trip ends, as it's currently written, is different in this subsection than it is in the one that we're just discussing.
That's correct. The threshold is
Correct.
different. Is that what you're referencing? Okay. So the other item that I did not mention is this says, so when we look at page 18, in chapter 50, letter N, where it says any application for a rezoning, that was miswritten. That should have said any application for a land disturbance permit. So that the clarification between the two, the reason for the two different thresholds being for a land disturbance permit, that being a by right development, something that's currently in the comp plan and zoned that use, then the threshold, we were comfortable at staff level that being a higher number, and is consistent with other counties and municipalities, to have a higher threshold for a by right development that comes through land review, compared to a more stringent requirement of 1,000 trips or 100 vehicles in the peak hour, being a little bit more particular when it does come through a zoning as a different land use, that requirement would be different. We would suggest the language for the definition for trips be in both chapter 50 and 134 to clarify. Does that answer your question?
Commissioner Gambrill, did Drew answer your question?
So what I understand is on section page 18, which is section 50-76, and you're going to change that to LDP, which is land disturbance permit, correct? And then we're going to leave it as rezoning application in section 134, 121.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And whoever has the next code section can feel free to just jump right in.
That will be Lieutenant Vance Dupree.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, good afternoon. My name is Vance Dupree, and I'm currently the Administrative Services Lieutenant for the Cobb County Police Department. Appear before you today to present proposed changes to the noise ordinance contained in Chapter 50, Article 7 of Cobb County Code. The Police Department is primarily responsible for the enforcement of the noise ordinance. Section 50-256 utilizes a distance measurement of 100 feet to determine if a violation exists. If the noise is plainly audible from this distance, a Cobb County police officer may take enforcement action. This action could result in a summons to appear before the magistrate court of Cobb County. Proposed changes would alter the determination of a violation based on distance by amending it to a decibel metric. A decibel is a unit of measurement for sound. A-weighted decibels, abbreviated dBA, are an expression of the relative loudness of sounds in air as perceived by human ears. This logarithmic weighting closely resembles the loudness perceived, This logarithmic weighting closely resembles the loudness perceived by the human ear. The A-weighting network is preferred for adjusting the actual sound spectrum to one more like that heard by a person. This weighting is the result of much research, is commonly used, and is the proposed weighting for a noise ordinance. Under the proposed amendments, the proposed violation thresholds differ depending on time of day. From 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., the threshold for violation would be 65 dBA. The threshold for violation lowers to 60 dBA during the night from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 60 decibels is a normal conversation between two people from about 3 feet away. For reference, a 5 decibel increase is perceived as 1.4 times louder by the human ear. These levels match what is currently used by Marietta and Kennesaw for residential and commercial areas. Other agencies like Smyrna, Powder Springs, Austell, City of South Fulton, Sandy Springs, and Johns Creek use similar decibel thresholds in their ordinances. Should the proposed change to decibels be approved by the board, the police department would need to be authorized to purchase certified handheld decibel meters for enforcement. These meters would provide the readings necessary to take enforcement action and provide evidence to be used in court if necessary. Section 50-257 enumerates prohibited noises. For all but 2 acts in this section, time and distance requirements are removed to be compatible with the previous section. Construction and repair of buildings, as well as associated noise, is only permitted between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday. The act encompassing landscape equipment like mowers, weed eaters, and leaf blowers remains the same as adopted last year by this board, which expressly prohibits these activities daily from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. Section 50-258 provides exceptions to the noise ordinance. Exception A sought to preserve licensed activity under existing ordinances. The word previously was added to address any potential uncertainty with future zoning ordinance amendments. The current ordinance as written works. These proposed changes would provide a metric for measuring noise nuisances as well as align Cobb County's ordinance with other government partners. At this time, we would request more time to continue to review and research the decibel-based enforcement approach. Should the board decide not to move forward with these proposed changes, any recommendations received will be considered for a modified proposal for the next code amendment cycle change. I respectfully appreciate your time in hearing the proposed amendment changes. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. And again, it was my understanding from correspondence received from public safety leadership that there was a desire to hold any revision to this ordinance so that you can do that thorough analysis as you just stated. And so I hope all the commissioners heard that and will consider that request. And again, as he shared, should we move forward with changing it tomorrow night, they will still take some time to do that analysis to ensure that we have the best code that we can provide in this subject matter. With that, I saw 3 cameras go on at the same time. I'm going to presume that Commissioners Burrow, Sheffield, and Gambrell have questions. Commissioner Burrow, do you have a question? Yes.
Yes. So are we suggesting to hold this?
Yes, ma'am. That is my suggestion.
Okay. Because I did have a question, but I'll wait to see. I mean, there's no need really, because I had a constituent request the same to study it more thoroughly, and we have had some emails about pressure washers, things that are higher than the decibel allowed during the day. I mean, restricting homeowners from being able to do work outside like that during the day. And how would it be measured and enforced is, my other question. So thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. And that's, excuse me, that's where my hold request came from, was I did hear from members of civic associations that brought up some very valid points. And frankly, I think rather than us doing little parts at a time each year, we just do a comprehensive one and present it next year, and hopefully the board can be done with it for a while.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and before we go to you, Commissioner Sheffield, I just want to clarify, because we advertise this code, we will have to go through the full hearing and hear from the public. But when it comes time for us to make a formal decision, we can request that it's held. Okay, Commissioner Sheffield?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. With respect to the first paragraph, to 50-256, there's description for violations and penalties, but I didn't see any penalties noted. Is that somewhere else in the code that wasn't
is.
printed here?
I'm sorry, it's punishable by section 110 of the county code, which I believe 110 is kind of that
I
catch-all.
see. Okay, yep, I see it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Commissioner Gamble, I had you, and then I'm going to go to Commissioner Richardson. Commissioner Gamble, do you still have a question? I saw your camera go on when.
Yes, so this code amendment would require the board to purchase the DBA readers. Has the department costed that out?
So I've looked into the DB readers. They range from, average $200 because we can't just use the ones on our iWatch, if you will. So average of $200. They make them commercial types that I guess they mount at a location that are in the thousands of dollars. But on average, I think that they would be about $200 a piece.
And do we know which one is acceptable in a court of law?
So they would have to be ANSI certified, and I forget what ANSI stands for. I'd be glad to look it up. I literally, while we're on this meeting, got a message from Marietta because I did inquire for them what exact reader they used, and it literally came in while we're on this meeting. So I will look at that as well.
All right, do you have any additional questions, Commissioner? All right, thank you. Commissioner Richardson?
Really great question. The only thing I was going to say was in our analysis of this moving forward, I would definitely want us to take into consideration what's the surrounding density of that area when it comes to noises, because it does vary. And then also there was inquiry in terms of looking at section 2 being prioritized over that first, number 2 prioritized over number 1, that there was more of a desire for the nighttime versus the daytime, since there are other codes that regulate the daytime. So just to consider that as a part of the whole analysis.
Yes, ma'am. And as part of that going forward in the future, I think it needs to be a shareholder group. I will be the first to admit I don't know a whole lot about zoning. I do see other ordinances from other agencies, or excuse me, other jurisdictions that they may even have different decibel levels for different types of zoning, residential, commercial, industrial. So those are all little things that have recently come up after talking to a couple of people from the public. So I really do think it should be a shareholders group, code enforcement, police department, et cetera, that come up with this comprehensive ordinance.
Good. And just a final comment from me is that I know the issue with this is sometimes the level of subjectivity, which is why those decibel readers are helpful. But I do have some question about the level of subjectivity looking at section 50-257, section 2D pertaining to yelling and shouting. There is some activity there which is interesting and is in the eye, typically is of the beholder, it could be of the listener, whether activity like singing is a disturbance that could be actionable under this code. And so I know you're going to have another look at this, but just, and recognizing that there's some subjectivity here that we should consider, perhaps being very clear on how it's actionable, or perhaps not even making it actionable.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Our next presenter will be Nick Dahl.
Hey, everybody. Let me share my screen with you. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, Let me first start by thanking the chairwoman and the board for allowing me the opportunity to present these code changes or proposed code changes today. I want to introduce myself. My name is Nick Daw. I'm the division chief of the Cobb County Fire Marshal's office, and I'm also the county fire marshal. As I was preparing my presentation, I did just want to point out it's hard to believe it's been a year. I can still remember doing this last year. And time flies. So I'll do my best to be quick here. I got 7 quick proposals. I know the fire code stuff can sometimes be technical. I'll do my best to give you a high perspective, but if anyone at any time has any questions or anybody has anything further described, please feel free to just let me know while I'm discussing it. And then, like the other presenters, if anyone wants a one-on-one and wants to discuss some of these proposed changes, just let me know. We will do our best to make ourselves available around your schedule. So, all right. Let me back up one slide, actually. Okay. So the first proposal is, let's see. We're having an issue, and I'm going to try to explain the what and the why as requested. What we're trying to do here in the fire marshal's office is expire old permits that don't have any activity. And the why is we're trying to emulate or match some of the way the building department operates. Most of this section, what I tried to do to keep myself accurate is the underlined sections are the new proposed language. And if it's not underlined, it's going to be existing language. So as you can see here, there's 5 points that we're trying to put out. And the highlighted green section in the bottom was an actual clerical typo, and it actually may make a difference. So I wanted to point it out and, explain to the group that was actually, as was sent out earlier, that was the word about. But in short, what we're trying to do is essentially say, after 90 days, if you've not done anything with a permit, it would expire. But if you go after our department to the other cities or the Cobb County Building Department and get it approved, you get another 90 days. And we're not intending to cancel permits that have any activity at all. We've actually built in under Section 5 that any meeting or work progress inspection or discussion with us, we consider to be activity. But we do have permits that people have pulled and have never called us back out that are 5 and 6 years old. We go back in future years, and it can be a challenge. So what we want to do is we want to talk to these people sooner rather than later, and this proposal should do that. Before I move on, did anybody have any questions related to this? Okay. Next is section 54-51.2. It is also a new section. We wanted to make pre-construction meetings mandatory and under certain conditions. What a pre-construction meeting is, it's where the Cobb County Fire Inspector goes out to the project and gives a little bit of a presentation to the contractor so that they understand how the inspection process works. Because as many of you are aware, different jurisdictions have different processes. We feel it's important to get in front of the people and before things are built and explain the subtle nuances of how our process may be different from the last one they just worked on. And for those that, I don't know who else received this, but earlier today, I got a letter from the Council of Quality Growth on January 25th today. And it says it was addressed to Chairwoman Cupid and commissioners. So if you got this, you'll see that there is a comment that came from the Council of Quality Growth, and I guess it's Michael Parrish, President and CEO. We are very open to adding that statement. They said if you look to the middle of the letter, it says, we recommend adding a provision that allows the fire marshal to waive pre-construction meetings for applicants who demonstrate expertise and understanding of the county inspection process. We are very open to that. What we're trying to do, as many of you have probably been contacted, people that don't have a lot of experience can get caught up in the process. So it's inexperienced people we're targeting, or extremely complicated projects. And we would also notify these people of that by putting some kind of a stamp on their plans.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Yes, if I can respond to that. The drafting of the reasons why this may occur doesn't include the level of experience there, as opposed to just carving out something for those with experience, maybe just putting in some language to just address the level of expertise. Yeah, so it doesn't look like you're just making a carve out for a certain group, just you have the ability to weigh.
Sure. And I worked with Ryan Johnson with legal. We tried to write this a couple of different ways, but the challenge is, complex projects and really small projects that don't have a lot of money are usually the target areas. Most people would usually, if they have experience in Cobb, call for this because it's almost used as an opportunity to meet their inspector and bring in the sub trades. And we give a presentation that has about 60 points on it. So we're happy to add in something that says anybody with experience doesn't need to do this, but we would essentially, in the plan review process, put a note on their plan saying either it's complex or for a various reason, we would respectfully request a pre-construction meeting.
Okay.
And this would happen, to be clear, on their job site. We go to the project. Usually there's a job trailer, and we present in there to all the different trades. It's a really beneficial thing. It helps people avoid, certain things that can make things easier or save them money and time.
You might save all the emails and calls to commissioners when a project is in progress.
Yeah, this actually came, we've always wanted it, and it was a subtle, I guess, nudge from a commissioner saying, why don't we ever look at making this required? And we're happy to do that. I can't imagine that this is going to be hated. Someone's not going to benefit from this, but we really are targeting the inexperienced people and the really complicated projects.
Okay.
So if no one has anything else on this, I'll move on to the next one. So Cobb County as a whole already has section 54.2. It's where a lot of our special events and parade permits come from. It can be confusing. I know over the last year we've had some unique circumstances with outdoor special events, and there is a lot of regulation, particularly in the parade section, that not many people look at. I think a parade probably 30 or 40 years ago, when the ordinance was originally crafted, was the term they used to describe a special event. And special events nowadays you almost always fall underneath the parade ordinance, which doesn't exactly feel like a fit. So what we tried to do is clean some of this up and just say outdoor social gatherings with projected crowds exceeding 1,000 persons shall require a permit from the fire marshal's office. This is already in some of our codes in a couple of different areas. It's also likely in the county's ordinance related to parades, but we wanted to make it a little cleaner. And this is also where we're starting to look through some of these events for if they need EMS service or the coverage for EMS or hydration stations. There's a lot of different things that could be needed for an outdoor special event. And we were just trying to clean it up and put it in one spot. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, I'm going to move on to 54. Go ahead.
Sorry, Nick. I do. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm sorry. So the outdoor social gatherings, and I know you say projected crowds exceeding 1,000.
Sure.
Is that 1,000 at one time, 1,000 over the entire day? Because my thought is, football games, soccer tournaments, depending on where those are held, can draw large crowds.
Sure.
Would they be subject to having to get an operational permit?
So it's essentially a special event permit, but possibly. So the intention of this would be at one time. It's not, throughout the day. You could pretty much say certain businesses probably have more traffic than that. But there are some pretty large events that happen throughout the county, and sometimes, when you can get 2,000-3,000 people and there's no EMS coverage, or the amount of people and the parking for some of these things, our intention would be to try to provide the service that's already listed in our ordinances, that if we knew about them, we would get in front of them faster. So a lot of times, some of the events that, the larger events that happen throughout the county and the cities, they get permitted for various other reasons. But we're just trying to have like a single way so it would be cleaner to get in front of the process versus waiting for the firework permit to, show up and us know that they're having an event, or the outdoor cooking, or the large, smoking equipment and things like that. So we're amicable to changing some of this. We did try to write it in a very clean way to just say, look, when you're having large outdoor crowds, we want to review it to make sure, for the fire department's perspective, the EMS, the hydration in certain months of the year, is covered.
Okay, I guess I'll just schedule a one-on-one with you to discuss further.
Sure. And I'm happy to do that. I'll follow up with you after this meeting, and if you just give me a couple of times, I'd be happy to come in. And like I said, if there's adjustments, we're open to some of them.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So this is really, you can see there's no underlined material here. This is where we deleted section E, which was some of the appeals board. Some of you have been around the last couple of years, have heard some of the challenges with the way it was adopted or written. And during this code amendments process, we're going to be putting in some new language for an appeals board for the fire marshal's office. So nothing in this section other than just deleting section E. All right. So in section 54, 56, did anybody have a question before?
No questions, Nick, but I did want to make an observation that we are on page 9 of a 29-page packet. The time is now 3:17. Once this is concluded, we have another presentation after this, which is a budget presentation. And we have our evening meeting to follow at 7:00 p.m. So it is going to be my request that from this point on, that all questions are reserved for the sessions that we have after this, or put in writing, so that we can get through this and provide enough time for our next presentation. And in fact, Nick, when you are done presenting, I'm going to have us take a 5-minute break.
Sure.
Then we'll come back and conclude the rest of the code sections, and also have our final presentation.
And if you want, I'll do my best to go a little faster. But if anybody has any concern on the topic, please just let me know. So in section 54, 56, what we essentially did here is under 7, there's a term called the fire code. It's in the definitions. We added NFPA 1 to it. In Title 25 of Georgia, they have bits and pieces of 2 different code books that they reference, the International Fire Code and NFPA 1, which are both different manufacturers of a fire prevention code, the fire code. And what we're trying to do is adopt them both cleanly. And then if there's a conflict administratively, we would essentially just resolve it through the decision of the fire marshal. And there was a typo in here, and it makes a difference. it shouldn't have said state fire marshal. It would just be county fire marshal. So fire marshal, which is defined. Let's see. There's nothing there. Under Article 5 for fire protection contractors, in Cobb County for years, we've always individually licensed our sprinkler and hydrant contractors. I don't know if it's just because there's been a lot of turnover in the industries, but there's a lot of challenges with businesses hiring people to do fire protection services that they can't necessarily do. So sprinkler contractors and hydrant contractors have been regulated since the 80s. What we're trying to do here is define the term fire protection contractor to essentially mean the same thing as a sprinkler contractor, just deal with some of the other trades. And I'll move to 5484, where we're going to basically be trying to have an operational permit through NFPA 1. And if a person, for no fee, if you're a fire protection contractor, we basically will give you a Cobb County operational permit per year, annual, and we're considering doing every other year. So it may not necessarily just be annual. We basically just want to make sure that you're a legitimate business, have insurance, you can do the services that you're offering, and work with county legal to have them sign an acknowledgement waiver just for county. And then we would basically put a contractor list of the individual trades on the county website so businesses can communicate with them better and more efficiently, instead of just going to Google and typing in fire protection, hydrant, contractor, and getting a bunch of people that will sell them services that they're not able to do. And then the last, and I'll go quick on this, Section 54-119 is the last 3 slides of this, will be the technical information related to how the Fire Marshal's Appeal Board will work. New construction is not something that can be heard by it because of the way Title 25 works. The appeal for new construction needs to go to the state fire marshal, and state law governs that. But this is going to, as closely as possible, match what the building department does with their construction appeals board. So we worked with Brian Johnson at Legal. We took the Section 109 of Appendix A of the International Fire Code, and it's the most recent printed version of it. And we tried to take that for prescriptive language and make it as close as possible to match the individual building department's appeal board. We need to do this. We need to codify the International Fire Code. It's been in our ordinance for probably the last 2 or 3 years. And we're just getting to the point where something needs to be done this code cycle. So most of this was drafted by county legal. And if there's any further questions, I'm happy to answer them. Here's the other 2 slides.
Nick, I just have one comment to add to Section 54-120 as far as the appeals.
Sure.
Is there going to be a fee that they have to pay when they file an appeal?
I think that will ultimately be a decision for the board. I would recommend that you do have a fee of some kind. Earlier on, I believe there is something here that talks about F compensation for the board, may be something that you can also add. Ultimately, the board has decision for that, but my recommendation would be to charge something, because if not, you will get more, you will get things that shouldn't be appealed.
If they appeal and win, it's given back to them.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to, if anybody appeals and wins, whatever the fee is, I would totally support allowing them to have it back. It's not really about the money for us.
Thank you. And again, that was our Public Safety Director, Carter, who commented, for those that can't see him on the screen. And again, I know some of us may have burning questions or comments, but if we open up for one, that's going to be potentially 5, and it will delay this meeting. So again, I'm just asking that we hold all of those comments and questions for after this hearing. So Jessica, our next presenter, please. Oh, yes, thank you. We're taking a break.
Yes.
Sorry, Jessica. Yes, I was reminded of our county clerk. I said we'd take a break. Yes, commissioners, please, the time is 3:24. Let's come back and resume at 3:30. Again, keeping in mind, we have about another 65% of this presentation to go through. We have our presentation again by juvenile courts for their budget. And we have tonight's meeting at 7 o'clock. So let's be mindful of that when we come back. Thanks, and we'll go ahead and take a break. brief break. We are still in review of our code amendments, and I believe we are now at Chapter 78 for licenses, permits, and businesses.
Yes, Chair, that will be me again. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so the first two changes here are in the definition section of Chapter 78. This is to, currently under Chapter 78, it talks about gross receipts. And of course, gross receipts are how we determine the occupation tax that's due from each business. Currently under Chapter 78, there's an exemption for the first $25,000 in annual gross receipts from the rental of commercial property. That's something that's been in there a long time. We're really not sure why it's there. We are proposing to remove that exemption. Receipts from rental of single family residential will still continue to be excluded. So that's the recommendation on that one. And then the next one, 78-43, this is specific to change of location or ownership of a business. As you all are likely aware, we're undergoing a software conversion here in the Community Development Agency, and the Business License Division is the first group to move forward with that. As we move forward with that software conversion, just to streamline our process, from here out, the process for a change of location or change of ownership will be the same as a new business. So it'll be one process either way. We still have to create the records. So again, it's really just streamlining our processes. No significant change there.
Okay.
And then that's it for me. The next section will be covered by Mr. Ashball.
All right, let me get my presentation up. Okay. This code section, first I want to recognize my detective, Bruce Witt. He did all this extensive work on this, the research and writing. So I want to recognize him. This section, as it exists right now, it's an incomplete ordinance. There were no measures for suspension or revocation of licenses. There were no penalties for violations. So a lot of that had to be added, but primarily what we were looking at is human trafficking and the part that massage parlors play in that. So there is a well-established link between the two. Human trafficking, particularly for labor and sex, is worldwide, it's a huge industry. The Department of State estimates almost 25 million people currently enslaved in forced labor, 4.8 million of those in forced sexual exploitation. According to Forbes, the illicit massage activity accounts for roughly 4.5 billion, or about a quarter of the $16 billion a year massage industry. Human trafficking, it is a significant problem in Metro Atlanta and Cobb County. And they are known to frequently move victims between business locations to make it harder for authorities to track or locate them. They take their identification. And that's what these changes are based on, is to help us. We can't eliminate human trafficking, but we're going to take a unique approach to putting a dent in it by making it very difficult to conduct illicit massage activity in Cobb County. Currently, there are a lot of gaps in regulations, state law, county ordinance, that allows these traffickers to really operate here. So the state of Georgia regulates and licenses massage therapists, but there are a lot of employees in these facilities that do not have to be licensed. Front desk personnel, cleaning staff, or the kind of infamous foot masseuse. This creates this opportunity for them. And under our current county ordinance, we do require a background check on these employees at the time that they apply for the license. Afterwards, anybody hired after the license is issued, there is no requirement really for that background check, or at least not a realistic one. So since there's no work permit required, The businesses are just failing to notify the county as required under the current ordinance. So there are no background checks being done on employees except whoever's listed in the application for the license. So we've updated this section to fill these gaps as best we can and provide the police department and the business license division with additional tools that we can use to address human trafficking in massage parlors and just deter some of this harmful conduct that goes on that's harmful to our county citizens. So our summary of changes in section 78, first is section 78-273. So the ordinance currently requires them to submit this list, but we're adding the police department into that rather than just the business license office. We are going to implement an online portal where they can report it directly to my office. Any employees they hire within 72 hours, as exists in the ordinance, will have to be submitted to us, and that way we can ensure they come in and get the permit. 78-275, this was added because it's pretty common in these types of places with the illicit massage activity, especially with the trafficking like this, that they'll actually have the person living in the massage parlor. And we've found signs of this here in Cobb at various massage parlors. And you go in, the person working actually has one of the massage rooms, looks like a hotel room for them. They've got their clothes and personal effects in there. It's all set up for them to sleep in there and everything. So we added a prohibition for any employees to be on the premises between midnight and 5 a.m. The ordinance allows the hours of operation from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So we gave them a little leeway on either side to get in there a little early, or for cleaning crews to be on site after 10 p.m., but gone by midnight. We felt that was reasonable. 78-292, this was missing as far as the enumeration of due cause for suspension or revocation of licenses. Well, was one of the problems was there were stipulations for granting a license, but there was no stipulations for what constituted due cause to revoke or suspend that license. 293, this has been amended to require certain signage at the health spas, like what services they offer, what the pricing is, and also prohibit the use of locks on interior doors to the massage rooms inside. Our rationale there is we've run into this with other businesses where when we do an inspection or anything, they're like, oh, we don't have keys to that door or whatever. When you go to the doctor's office and you get undressed in a waiting room, an exam room, they don't lock the doors. They close those, they mark that they're occupied, and that's sufficient for that privacy. So that was added to that section. And also to prohibit the presence of anyone under the influence of drugs or alcohol or in possession of those things. Again, just to try to minimize the level of illicit activity or crime that's going on around those. As I said before, the ordinance was kind of incomplete previously, so we've added sections 78-298 through 301. 298 prohibits the employment of persons with certain criminal convictions. And this goes towards also requiring not just a background check, but an actual work permit like we require for people who work in pawn shops or businesses that sell alcohol. It's very difficult to enforce the background requirement if they don't actually have to come in here and get that permit. Also, in combating human trafficking, when a person comes to our office to get a work permit, they have to show identification. If they're not born in the United States, they have to show papers showing that they're either a U.S. citizen or have a right to work or permission to work from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Office. So if they're being trafficked, they're going to have to be given back those documents at that point, and we will be able to train even our civilian staff to spot signs of possible human trafficking and alert us to those, so we can conduct follow-up or even interviews in our office with that person one-on-one, away from any handlers that might be there watching them or controlling their papers. It also allows for anyone denied a work permit to appeal that to the License Review Board, same as alcohol permits. Section 78-299, this is the actual requirement for the work permit, and it requires all employees and contractors not licensed by the state as massage therapists. This way we can, because we've seen this before and other agencies have seen this. You go in to do an inspection at a massage parlor and everybody who's not licensed as a massage therapist is a cleaning person, the front desk lady, or just visiting. So this way we can kind of address that a little better. It establishes the term of the permits as 12 months, consistent with other work permits that we issue, and it requires them to also have that permit available for inspection at all times while they're working, same as the alcohol ordinance or pawn shop chapters. 78-300 establishes the penalties for the violations of this chapter. These mirror the alcohol ordinance. We base all these new sections in that on the alcohol ordinance and other existing ordinances for consistency. And then 78-301 provides for the conduct of hearings and appeals and further allows the license review board to settle those permit denials and license denials. These changes, like I said, they kind of complete the ordinance and they will allow for improved regulation of these high-risk businesses and make the conduct of illicit massage activity much more difficult in Cobb County. We may not be able to stop it again, but we can push it out of our county and possibly rescue some of these victims by being able to observe, spot who they are, and conduct those follow-up investigations. And that concludes what I have. Any questions? I'm sure there's a lot. I'm happy to meet with y'all.
Exactly. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
No questions, really. I just want to say thank you.
I appreciate it, ma'am.
It's, like you said, it may not stop it, but it will definitely help restrict it in Cobb and hopefully everywhere else. This is
Thank you. Thank you.
This will add a proactive enforcement angle. Currently, our vice units will work complaints about prostitution and that at these facilities, but there's nothing really preemptive or proactive going, and that's what we're trying to get started.
Thank you.
thank you.
And that, Jessica, yes, we have chapter 70, or excuse me, our next chapter is short-term rental, 78.
Yes. Okay, so, and we've talked about short-term rentals a few times at this point. We initially brought this in 2020 for consideration for a code amendment. It did not move forward at that time. We've had a good, back in 2020, late 2020, had a good working session with some stakeholders, including representatives of the Short-Term Rental Owners Association of Georgia, and that's sort of the industry organization for short-term rental owners here in the state. And then, of course, we did the work session for you all back during the summer. So at this point, we're bringing forth a code amendment that's proposed and for your consideration. One thing that has not changed is the short-term rental definition is still rentals that do not exceed 30 consecutive days. Initially, when we brought this forward, we talked about doing it through an occupational tax certificate after some input from short-term rental owners and the association. We agreed that we could do a short-term rental certificate instead rather than an occupational tax certificate. What it still achieves for us is this will still be issued through the business license division, and it would achieve for us that we would have a registration for those short-term rental properties. There would be a separate certificate required for each short-term rental, and on that certificate, the application will require them to specify the number and location of parking spaces. And as we've shared with you in the past, the most common complaints that we get regarding short-term rentals in Cobb are pertaining to parking, litter, and also noise. One of the most important things that the proposed code here does is that it requires the owner on the application to designate a short-term rental agent. And this would be someone, it can be the owner or they can designate someone else if they're not local, but there would have to be a local contact that would be available to handle any problems that might arise with a short-term rental. And some of the challenge with short-term rentals is that the codes aren't different, the problems aren't different from properties that have long-term occupants, but obviously they're only there for 3 days or 4 days or a week. So it's a little bit more difficult to correct some of those situations for a more transient occupant. So by having the short-term rental agent, we would have somebody who we know their name and their contact information. It would be available in the unit and also on file with our office. That would be somebody that we could reach out immediately to handle any issues. And it would also be someone who would accept the service of notice of violation if there were any issues with the short-term rental. Any changes to that rental agent would need to be submitted to our office within 5 business days. The standard conditions for short-term rentals, again, short-term rentals would be permitted in any of the R residential zoning districts. They would be required to have a valid certificate of occupancy, just like any structure that's being inhabited by people would have to have. So that's no different than any other building for human habitation in the county. It would have to meet all of the same requirements that pertain to residential uses. With regard to parking, of course, there would be no parking on unhardened surfaces. They would have to have an adequate number of off-street parking spaces as described or as prescribed by the zoning ordinance. The occupancy is the same as the single family occupancy, so limited to 1 adult per 390 square feet in accordance with our life safety codes here in Cobb County. All building, fire, and health and sanitation regulations would also have to be adhered to. So we included this in the code, although it's not different from anywhere else, just so that way it's very clear for people who are applying for a short-term rental certificate would know that the expectations here in Cobb are that you would meet all of these requirements. Advertising for any short-term rentals would be required to include on the advertisement the maximum occupancy of the unit, as well as the maximum number of vehicles, clarifying the noise regulations, and that would also have to be posted within the unit. Again, the rules aren't different for short-term rentals. They wouldn't be proposed to be different for short-term rentals, but it's important, particularly with short-term rentals where you may have people who are not local, to know what the expectations and the requirements are here in Cobb. From an enforcement standpoint, complaints would be submitted to code enforcement, and then code enforcement would notify the agent and the owner who are responsible for contacting the occupant to address the issue. We would issue notice of violations to the owner and or the short-term rental agent. And also the Cobb police would have the authority to enforce this section and issue citations. And again, most of the issues that we have with short-term rentals, a lot of times they're noise related, and those typically happen after hours, and the police department is the entity that typically enforces the noise ordinance. The penalties for violation, and this has changed a little bit from when we put it forward before. The first violation within a 12-month period would still be $500, $750 for the second violation within a 12-month period. And then the third violation with the 12 months would result in revocation of the certificate, and any new applications for the property would be rejected within the next 12-month period. So essentially, it really behooves the owner and the agent to ensure that their occupants are acting appropriately and following the codes of Cobb County. From a taxation standpoint, short-term rentals are subject to the same taxes that other lodging facilities are, including hotel motel taxes. And of course, with the House bill that was passed last year, the platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, the platforms that advertise and host those short-term rentals are already collecting and submitting hotel motel taxes to us at this point. Tourism fees also, and any other state and local fees that are related to the lodging of individuals. And then the owner would be responsible for ensuring that all of those revenues are collected and submitted to the state or the county as required by code and by state law. So I had a good call yesterday with the attorney working with the Short-Term Rental Association of Georgia. She's reviewed our code. We sent it to them to take a look at. Whenever we talked to them initially, they told us that they had worked closely with the city of Atlanta on their ordinance and to take a look at that, and we did. And whenever I talked to the attorney yesterday with the Short-Term Rental Owners Association of Georgia, she indicated that they felt this was a very reasonable code. I think it achieves what we're looking to do in terms of having a contact, knowing who to reach out to if there's a problem, but also still allows for this to be a viable option for property owners here in Cobb. And at this point, we would just certainly look to the board for any policy direction if this is something that you indeed want to move forward with, and glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jessica. Again, we'll hold on submitting our questions after today's hearing, just to ensure that we can get through all of the code sections. But I appreciate, appreciate your suggestion.
Very good. And the next item will be Chapter 90, Parks and Recreation, just one change.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon. We've got one change to the code for 9063, which are restricted use of parks facilities, and it deals with smoking in county-owned or maintained parks. It simply says smoking or vaping shall be prohibited within the boundaries of any park, sports complex, recreation area, or facility owned, leased, or operated by Cobb County, including any open area within such park, sports complex, recreation, or facility. And what we did was we actually put Cobblestone Golf Course and Legacy Links Golf Course exempt from this section 9063. Just to give you an idea of what we started from, we really didn't have anything to go on. We had nothing about smoking or anything in county parks. So one thing I did was went back and looked at all of the cities within Cobb County and then some of the surrounding cities and counties around us. And just, it was a mishmash, as you can imagine, because everybody's a little bit different. So I just took bits and pieces of every one. There are some cities inside of Cobb County that are smoking and tobacco free. There are some cities that are smoking only. There are some cities that have a smoking ban, but it can be established by the parks and rec a certain distance away from certain things, sort of like a designated smoking area. So again, just looking at all of this, and the one with Marietta also owning their own golf course, they actually did the same thing and exempted the Marietta golf course from their city ordinance. So it's just one of the things, like I said, I just sort of looked at what some of the others were doing around and just sort of tried to come up with something that for us was maybe more palpable for everyone. Again, this was in discussion with public health. They originally, I think, had wanted us to look at something a little bit more robust with the tobacco. But I think, like I said, looking around at some of the other cities and counties, and then talking about the enforcement aspects of that, I think that was something that we were just a little bit more hesitant to look at. But I think with the smoking, I think we're a little bit better off. And again, this is just one of those things that Cobb County was one of the last in the area. Most of the other cities, in fact, 5 of the 6 inside of Cobb County have some type of ordinance. So we're just wanting to not be the last one, which I think we've done with this. And again, any questions about this, just let me know.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, that takes us to section or chapter 106. I'm sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's Drew. Thank you.
Right. So a couple revisions suggested here. The first one is 106-91. So the term residential collector and residential subdivision street have created a level of confusion as projects have moved forward. And so what this does is it refines that to be just arterials, collectors, and local streets to match up with the board approved thoroughfare master plan. And also as part of that, we would clean up some of the other language in there to make it very, very clear what the requirements are on each of those streets. We fielded some questions from Commissioner Gambrell about that and had proposed some language to make sure that it was very clear. Again, just a goal of clarity with that particular change. This is one that we've gotten a lot of community feedback on, was the developer contributions. I'll say that the goal with this and the way that it's been read is different. So we do recognize a need to clarify some of that language. And the thing very briefly was to codify what is currently happening. So when we look at the Floyd at Gore traffic signal that came on because of some development there, or some intersection improvements on Veterans, or the Ebenezer improvements as part of Sprayberry Crossing, each of those projects had an element where there was a necessary project related, and project related meaning that the development that came through zoning had a particular and acute impacts on the transportation network that needed to be mitigated from the development. And so what the county did was included stipulations, and the board approved that a developer agreement would be entered into for funding of those particular improvements. Now that's really only limited, or is limited to when the developer cannot reasonably complete those projects. So that would be a project that is off the frontage. For example, Sprayberry Crossing, it had impacts on Ebenezer Road. However, that's not on the frontage of the development. Some right-of-way was going to need to be acquired as part of that. Therefore, it was reasonable for the county, given the county's particular position and powers when it comes to right-of-way acquisition, to manage that particular project. Also, when we have a traffic signal where there's a negotiated impact, where there's background traffic, where it was nearly warranted, and the county in negotiations through the zoning process determines that that signal needs to be installed and the developer should contribute a portion of that. Perhaps they're just coming in and the fourth leg on a traffic signal, that then again, a developer contribution is possible to clarify that. So the language that we propose to clarify this further is to really refine this and to make it very clear that the only time that the county would entertain developer contributions for a project-related impact are those occurrences when it is in the county's best interest to do so. And there are mitigating circumstances. The scenario of a turn lane across the frontage, it's not in the county's best interest to take that on as a project. That would not be something that we would look to be eligible for this. So I ask for patience as we refine that language with the attorney's office. We'll meet with each of you individually to make sure that that intent does come across. The remainder of these items are fairly straightforward. Again, just clarifying process. The code section separates curb and gutter. This keeps a lot of that same language, but it eliminates some of the confusion that we've got about curb and gutter and what's required. And then as we move into the next chapter, the common theme through here is to not duplicate information between the code and the board-approved standards, development standards. So you'll see a lot of deletions here. No driveway shall be located within 80 feet of the street intersection. That's included within the development standards. And so that's the request here. That way the particular standards can be housed in one location and not have to be cross-referenced for any potential conflicts there. Similarly, AASHTO requirements, you'll see here intersections. These, the common theme through all of these is that it's just based on the design specifications in an established document already. Same with jogs, minimum pavement widths, again, county development standards for that. And then same for gutter. Then finally on 118, a minor change to just say that red curving is not something that the county, this codifies current practice. Red curving is not something that is currently maintained by Cobb DOT. And so this clarifies that it's just permitted on private property, and just clarifying current.
Very good. Thank you, Drew. With that, we are at chapter 134, zoning. I believe that falls under you, Jessica.
Yes, ma'am. So chapter 134, the first changes are in section 134 definitions. And of course, all of the amendments to chapter 134 have been to the Planning Commission, and they went to the Planning Commission back in the beginning of January. So through the definitions, we added a definition of automobile broker, and that of course is different from a like a car dealership, and that it's really more of an office use and they don't have any actual vehicles located on site. We do have state requirements there for automobile brokers. Whenever they're pursuing business, they have to get signed off by zoning. So we've just got a definition there to clarify what an automobile broker is compared to a dealership. There's also clarification in there for gross vehicle weight of a business vehicle. Before it just said 12,500 pounds, and we've clarified that that's gross weight, so it's very clear. Again, added automobile broker office to the definition of other consumer goods and services. We've also added a definition for semi-permanent cosmetic makeup practitioner. That's a little bit different from a tattoo artist. This is the semi-permanent tattoos that a lot of ladies get their eyebrows done. So that's really, it's sort of a separate service that we're accommodating here in the code at this point. And the Planning Commission has recommended approval of all those changes. Moving on to section 134-7, as you all may recall back in, I believe, 2019, or no, 2020, we updated the code with regard to poultry and backyard chickens. At that point, whenever we did that, there was some existing language in the code that we should have removed and should have cleaned up. So what we're doing here is to remove section 134-7 because it is conflicting with section 134-290, which is the new language that was incorporated in 2020. And also removing the definition of poultry from 134-1 because that's addressed in 134-290. And that one, again, is just a cleanup matter that the Planning Commission recommended approval of. And this section is one that Drew has already talked about a good bit, section 134-121. As you all know, we've had a lot of good input from the community on that. We also had a lot of good discussion on this at the Planning Commission meeting. And I think that the language that Drew has proposed and incorporating the definitions of trips and what have you is something that will clarify this. As a whole, this is going to be a great benefit to all of us in the zoning process because, as you all know, and perhaps even more so at the Planning Commission level, what so often happens is that these traffic studies are submitted at the last minute. Staff has not had time to review and provide feedback on those. And so essentially, as a result, the zoning cases typically get delayed. So what this will do is it will require set standards or redefine the standards for when a traffic impact study will be required for rezoning and SLUP applications. There were concerns initially. The draft that you have before you right now specifies anything more than 1,000 vehicle trip-ins per day or 100 vehicle trip-ins during a single hour. Currently, the code says 75 residential units, single-family units would be the threshold. So in reviewing that and talking with Drew, the Planning Commission's recommendation is that we drop that to 750 trips per day or 75 trips per hour. And again, I think that coupled with the additional definitions that we're adding and clarifying a trip versus a trip-in will make that clear and will ultimately result in us ensuring that those projects that really need a traffic study, that we're getting those and we're getting those in a timely fashion. So the Planning Commission held this at their January meeting to February 1st to get that clarification language, and then we expect to move that forward to the board at the second public hearing. Section 134-127, this language is being removed entirely. This is language, or it's one sentence that's being removed from this section. It's specific to the appeal of rezoning decisions. This is something that's being done after talking with the zoning manager and Brian Johnson and the county attorney's office. There's one line in that section that says the appeal shall be a de novo determination of the decision. This is something that is not currently the process anymore. That's something that's changed in the courts. So we're removing that language to come into line with what's actually the process at this point. And again, the Planning Commission recommended approval of that. Section 134-162 currently says that commencing April 4th of 96, no new applications for rezoning to the RA6 district will be accepted. That was a policy that was changed in 2012, as I understand it, and it was never updated in this part of the code. So at this point, we are proposing to remove that prohibition from accepting new RA6 applications. It's something that the county has been doing for some time. So we're cleaning that up, and the Planning Commission has recommended approval. Section 134-203.2, again, this is another cleanup item, and the RSL residential non-supportive district, in the intent, the purpose and intent section, it specifies that RSL non-supportive projects should be on arterial roads or collector roads with a minimum of 10 acres and a maximum density of 4 units per acre. But then further down in that same section, it does not include that specification that it could be a collector road with a minimum of 10 acres and a maximum density of 4 units per acre. So again, this is just making sure that that code is consistent throughout that section. Planning Commission has recommended approval. Section 134-221. Redevelopment Overlay District. As you all will recall, last year when we did the code amendments, at that time we amended the code to say that there would be no new applications for ROD accepted after March 1st, 2021. So at this point, we are not accepting applications and have no intent to. We do have, as you all know, we have the Sprayberry Crossing site, which was that did have the ROD overlay applied to it last year. We've had a request from a commissioner to go ahead and strike this code in its entirety from the zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission has recommended approval with that, but with the recommendation to consult with the county attorney to ensure that that ROD language will continue to be applied to that one singly zoned property in the county there at Sprayberry Crossing. You can stop me if I'm going too fast. 134-230. Yes, ma'am.
Yep, you're doing good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. 134-230 and also 134-231. This is the light industrial district, and then 231 is the heavy industrial district. This pertains to freestanding climate-controlled self-storage facilities. Currently, those facilities are regulated in section 134-279. At this point, we are recommending to remove 134-279 and to bring, I'm sorry, is it 279? It's to bring those, bring that language into the LI and HI district specifically. And that's where it is for the NRC and also O&I districts. And the language that we have here proposed currently mirrors the language that's in the NRC and also the O&I zoning districts. So it provides standards for the maximum building height, floor area ratio, architecture, and so forth, hours of operation, speaks to prohibition on overnight storage, storage of recreational vehicles, and ultimately it requires a SLUP. And so there would be a SLUP required in both the LI and HI zoning districts to have these facilities. And that's consistent with what's required in the O&I and also the NRC zoning districts. We had a lot of good discussion. There was a lot of public comments on this at the Planning Commission hearing. At that time, the Planning Commission held this one to the February 1st hearing to get some more clarification on the language, and also to give staff an opportunity to meet with some of the residents who came out that had concerns about the changes to the code. And John Peterson and I had a great meeting with Commissioner Gambrell and some of the residents in her district who were concerned, those who came out to the public hearing at the Planning Commission meeting. And I think that we're on track to get some language that they're more comfortable with in terms of making sure that they've got the protections that they desire as residents and as neighbors, and would still, achieve making sure that a SLUP is going to be required, which ultimately gives the board authority to approve all of these facilities. But they do certainly want to ensure that there's certain minimum standards in there that will be adhered to, regardless of who is sitting in those 5 chairs. So we are still working on this one, as well as 231. And that takes us to section 134-272, traffic and parking. There are a couple changes here that were put forth by the Department of Transportation. So if there are any questions on those, then we'll defer to Drew on those. But clarifying the curb cut requirements for districts other than our districts. A lot of our requirements for curb cuts and what have you, those are provided within the development standards. So again, just ensuring that we've got consistency in the documents that are regulating development. clarifying the process for approval of entrances and exits on state highways. And there's language in our code that says that if it's not approved, that there's 30 days to approve a request for an entrance or exit on the state highway. Well, obviously, that has to be granted by the Georgia Department of Transportation. It's something that's not in the hands of the county. So that's something we're tying our hands with 30 days to approve it or consider it doesn't make sense, because that's not our decision as a county, it's at the state level. I saw that there was some correspondence with Drew this afternoon about perpendicular parking on the public road, so prohibiting perpendicular parking on the public road, but also allowing for approval of parallel parking by DOT, and there's some language in there with regard to striping. And I know Drew indicated that for that language, where it speaks to parallel parking will not be striped, that also including that curb line parking and cul-de-sacs would not be striped. So we expect that'll be something to move forward in the next iteration of the draft. Another item that we discussed a couple years ago was allowing for parking on non-hardened surfaces in our districts on lots larger than 5 acres. Currently, a hardened treated surface is required for all vehicle parking. There are a number of lots in the county that are larger, and in fact, a number of them have gravel driveways that were pre-existing and are essentially grandfathered. There are several requests for variances to this that go to the Board of Zoning Appeals every year, and they pretty much without exception get approved. So we're recommending that we would allow for those by right parking on a non-hardened surface in our district for lots larger than 5 acres, so only on your large lots, that no vehicle should be parked within 50 feet of the right-of-way unless they are on a treated and hardened surface, so concrete, asphalt type driveway, and that any new access to a public road would require a 25-foot paved or asphalt apron at the public road. And that's the stipulation that is typically placed on those BZA approvals when those come forward for a variance, so it's consistent with that language. And then the Planning Commission recommended approval of all of these changes as well. The next one is with regard to 134-275-1, the Military Airport Hazard District. As you all are aware, back in 2018, there was a provision that was incorporated into this language that would allow for the Board of Commissioners to take existing adjoining uses, historical uses, and height, as well as other factors on a case-by-case basis into consideration with regard to the accident potential zone there near the Dobbins runway. This is another one that was requested by a commissioner to remove that language that would allow for the board to take other factors into consideration, so that it would strictly be the uses that are listed in the chart there in that code section as acceptable within the APZ or the accident potential zones. The Planning Commission did recommend approval of this, but they also recommended a change to section 134-275-145. Currently, that language says that the Community Development Department should identify whether or not the property is within the APZ 1, APZ 2, or a clear zone. And one of the planning commissioners, with the support of the other commissioners, recommended to change that language so that it's the responsibility of the applicant to disclose that the property is in APZ 1, APZ 2, or a clear zone, so the full burden for that's not exclusively on the county. 134-290, this is backyard chickens. Again, just a little cleanup matter here. Right now, the code section says backyard chickens under 80,000 square feet. This is going to change that to say the lot size is 2 acres, a minimum of 2 acres required to have backyard chickens by right. And then the code section will change title to say backyard chickens under 2 acres. And then the Planning Commission has recommended approval of that one. And then finally, a couple of changes to the sign code. The first one is 134-315, adding 1 permanent sign per entrance and exit not to exceed 3 square feet and 3 feet in height. This is on your commercially zoned property, non-residential uses on residential property. So that could be your churches and your schools, those uses that are not residential but are allowable on residentially zoned property, or apartments. So typically this is going to be your entrance or exit, those directional signs. But of course, we don't include that language in there because that would be regulating content, but that's the intent of this code, is to allow for that signage. And then 134-323, Again, this is, that language currently says it's for temporary signs on commercial and industrial property. So we're expanding that language to clarify that it's also for non-residential uses on residential properties and apartments. Again, the way that the code is written currently, a church would not be able to have a temporary banner because it's not a commercial or industrial use. Apartments would not be able to have a banner. So this would allow, we've had several churches who've wanted to have some temporary signage for various events and what have you that they have ongoing. And this was something that was allowed for under our previous sign code, but not incorporated whenever the sign code was updated a few years back. So this would expand that to provide for some temporary signage for those non-residential uses on residential properties as well as apartments, but would limit for those uses some of the temporary signage that may be more appropriate on truly commercial or industrial properties. So they would not be permitted to have searchlights or inflatable devices on those type of properties. Also, any types of inflatable advertising devices would only be permitted on a 4-lane roadway in a CAC or a RAC, and it would require a permit. And that would also be for your commercial and industrial zone properties. And the Planning Commission has recommended approval of those as well. And that is the conclusion of the code amendments to 134 and the conclusion of the code amendment package for 2022. So again, the next steps, of course, tonight is public hearing number 1. It'll be 7 o'clock tonight. From here, what we'll do, and we'll of course set up the meetings to talk with commissioners, and we'll take your feedback as well as any feedback that's garnered through the public hearings and the Planning Commission, where they held a couple of items for some additional clarification. We'll incorporate all that into the next draft that will be shared with you all on the Board of Commissioners. And the Planning Commission will hear their held items again on February 1st, and then we will publish the revised draft with the February 8th VOC agenda, but certainly we'll aim to get that out there more quickly than that. And then the second public hearing will be on February 8th, 9 o'clock. Again, glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jessica, to all staff for your work in preparing the amendments to the code. Thank you, commissioners, for your review of the code. I, again, ask for all of us to prepare questions to staff so that they can thoroughly make sure that all of your questions are answered, and so that the questions can be shared with all commissioners for all of us to consider your questions and comments, concerns, suggestions prior to our next hearing. My request, I'm hoping it's not too unreasonable, would be for us to get that to staff by Friday. But I just out of fairness to commissioners, knowing that this has just been a very busy time, if we can get that to staff, let's say no later than Sunday, so you have the weekend to do this. Jackie, I'm just going to ask for that. Just know if there are any Monday meetings for staff, at least they'll have that in hand and they can walk through the document with you. It's not necessarily for them to have all of the questions answered right when you're there. But again, this is to make sure that they have opportunity to hear you. And again, for us to get the questions to everyone else. Jackie, do you have any comments about that, or Jessica?
No comments about that, but I'd like to thank Adolphus for accommodating.
Yes. Just in the interest of time, Adolphus Graves with Juvenile Court was willing to move his presentation to the next work session for the commissioners. And so I thank him for his mindfulness of just the bulk of matters that we had to address today. So again, thank you all for your time. Commissioners, thank you again for all of your work. Everyone who's interested in these code amendments, thank you for tuning in. We look forward to engaging you so that we have addressed all the concerns and questions that people have prior to our second hearing. With that concludes our work session for today. If you're so willing, please come back and join us at 7 o'clock tonight for our Board of Commissioners meeting. Thank you.